Today I want to review with you add, subtract, multiply, and divide rational numbers. So remember that a rational number is going to be any number that can be written as a fraction. So we're going to write that definition. Rational number. A number that can be written as a fraction. And remember, we write our fractions with our numerator and our denominator. Also remember that we have different subsets of numbers. So we have our natural numbers. You know, this is our normal, when we were little, that we learned to count. 1, 2, 3. And then we have whole numbers, which is all of the natural numbers, including 0. We have our integers. So natural are positive, whole is 0. Integers are going to be including those negative numbers. So integers are technically negative numbers, 0, and positive numbers. And then we have our rational numbers, which include all of those numbers. Integers, negative whole numbers, positive whole numbers, and then also numbers that are written as fractions. So I want to recap for you the rules for when we add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So let's talk about adding and subtracting. So remember, when you add and subtract, you need a common denominator. You must have that. So I'm going to do a little example for you, a couple of them. So make sure you're writing those down in your journal. So if I wrote 5/8 plus 2 3/4. So again, I need a common denominator. Common denominator between 8 and 4 is going to be 8. So I'm just going to go ahead and write my 5/8 over here. In order to make 4 into 8, I have to multiply by 2. If I do that on the bottom, I have to do that on the top. So this is 2 6/8. So now that I have a common denominator, I just need to add my numerators, 11/8. Now this is an improper fraction. With an improper fraction, remember, we can do cowboy horse. 8 goes into 1 0 times 8 goes into 11. One time, we get 1 3/8. So I'm going to rewrite this as 1 3/8. Now don't forget about your 2 of your whole number. So 2 plus 1 is 3, and 3/8 is my answer. So 5/8 plus 2 3/4 is 3 3/8. If we're going to subtract, so for example 2 here, if I have 3 1/6 minus 1 2/5, again, I need a common denominator. So between 6 and 5, my common denominator is 30. So I'm going to write 3. To get to 30, I have to say 6 times 5. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So 5 30s minus 1, and 6 times 5 is 30. So 6 times 2 is 12. Now, more on the floor, go next door. You cannot take 12 from 5. So we're going to borrow from our 3. It becomes a 2. Now remember, when we're borrowing a whole, it has the same value in the numerator and the denominator. In this case, our denominator is 30. So we are adding 30 30s. Most of you know the trick of just adding our numerator and our denominator. So now I have 2 35 30s minus 1 12 30s. So 35 minus 12 is 23 30s. Remember, your denominator stays the same. 2 minus 1 is 1. So 3 1/6 minus 2 1/5 is 1 23/30. When we talk about multiply and divide, it's a little bit nicer. Okay? You do not need a common denominator, but you also can have no whole numbers. right? We need fractions only. And that fraction can be a regular fraction. It can be improper fraction. If you have a whole number, remember we put a 1 underneath it. So let's do a couple examples of that just to refresh our memory. If I have 1 3/8, and I'm going to multiply it by 4/5. Now again, no common denominator needed. We can leave that an 8 and a 5. But I do have a mixed number here, so I have to say 8 times 1 plus 3, 11/8 times 4/5. Now we've talked about in the past about cross-reducing if you wanted to rewrite your numerators. You could, and you can see that this becomes a 1 and a 2. Remember, when we multiply, we do top times top, bottom times bottom. Okay, always. So if you need to write that bit down, you can. If you can reduce before you multiply, it's going to make things a lot easier. This is 11/10, which we know is 1 whole and 1/10 left over. When we divide, we have to change it to a multiply. So if I said 4 divided by 2 2/3. Okay, so first of all, we're going to have to change our divide to multiply. And we do that with keep, change, flip. Okay? So the 4, how do we make a whole number into a fraction? We put a 1 underneath it. We're going to change the divide to a multiply. Now, before we can flip the 2 2/3, we're going to have to change that. Because remember, fractions only. 2 times 3 is 6 plus 2. This is 8/3. We need to flip that. Remember, that is called a reciprocal. So we're going to say 3/8. If you wanted to cross-reduce, you could rewrite your 8 and your 1. This is a 1. This is a 2. If you don't want to rewrite it, you can still do it like this. Top times top, bottom times bottom. 1 times 3 is 3. 2 times 1 is 2. 1 and 1/2. So that is your review. What I would like you to do for me is I want you to do a couple of practice problems, and we will look at those when you come in tomorrow. So I want you to do 2 5/8 divided by 1 1/2. I would like you to do 5/7 plus, and I'm writing this horizontally. If you want to write it vertically, that's fine. 3 2/3. I would like for you to try 4 3/8 times 1 1/3. And lastly, I would like you to try 7 1/7 minus 4 1/5. And you are going to need to borrow on this one. See you tomorrow.